Hey everybody, it's Janae here. So today I'm going to be doing a part 2 session. I will be studying the Congress in my American Government book, and I'm picking up where I left off. Last time I made the video, I talked about power of incumbency. We talked a little bit about the power of incumbency in the House and the Senate. And so now we're going to pick it up and talk about congressional apportionment. So in this video, I'm going to be learning while reading. So the expectation is for me to come across some things I might be unfamiliar with, and I may have to look some information up on my mobile device in order to get a better understanding. So please bear with me. Let's get started. So I will start by reading the election 2016, who wins control of the Congress. So that is just right before congressional apportionment. It says here, for the first 9 months of 2016, all media focus was on the presidential primaries, caucuses, and the party conventions. However, at the same time, all 435 members of the House of Representatives and about 1/3, 34 of the members of the U.S. Senate were consumed with their own professional features. A number of well-known members announced they would retire from the Capitol. Among them were Barbara Boxer, Democratic Senator from California, and Harry Reid, former Democratic Majority Leader of the Senate. The Republicans gained a large majority of the House of Representatives during the midterm election of 2014, ending up with 247 seats to the Democrats' 188 members. Due to the redistricting efforts of Republican after the 2010 census and the strength they exhibited in a rural of the suburban areas, Republican expected to maintain their majority in the 115th Congress. Both the Republicans and the Democrats were astutely aware that the landslide presidential win would change all the predictions. Presidential candidates who win large majorities across the nation are said to have coattails that help their members of their party win congressional seats. So coattails, let's look that up. I've heard of that word before, but I'm not super familiar with a coattail. I know that it's not a coat. I do recall that. So coattail is spelled Coattail. You can put an S at the end there. It says each of the flaps formed by the lower back of a coat, especially a tailcoat. So that is one of them. I don't know if that's what it is though. A coattail. Okay, so this one is what are presidential coattails? It says presidential coattail is the ability of a presidential candidate to bring out supporters who then vote for the party's candidate for other offices. Straight party voting was the norm, and winners in presidential elections often had long coattails. So again, presidential coattail is the ability of a presidential candidate to bring out supporters who then vote for his party candidates for other offices. So there we go. And straight party voting was the norm, and winners in a presidential election often had long coattails. So ability of a presidential candidate to bring out supporters who then vote for the party candidate. Does that make sense? I think it makes sense to me a little bit. So let's keep going here. All right, so this is due in a large part to the larger turnout of voters for the presidential candidate rather than any direct help being given to the congressional candidate. After the votes were counted in the 2016 election, the Republican majority declined by only 6 seats. Neither Mr. Trump nor Mrs. Clinton had much effect on the House races. Republicans continued to control the House in 2017 and 2018. The Senate presented a much dicier situation for the Republicans in 2016 because they only had a 5-seat majority to start with. In addition, there were more Republican seats in the toss-up category due to retirements and expected challenges in competitive seats. Dan Coats' retirement meant that Democrats had a strong chance to win the Indiana Senate seat, especially if Hillary Clinton won the state's electoral votes. Rob Portman, another Republican, faced stiff opposition in Ohio, another highly competitive state. The final election results found the Republicans maintaining control of the Senate by the slender majority of 52 to 48. After Jeff Sessions gave up his seat to become Attorney General, a Democrat replaced him, making the margin 51 to 49. The midterm election of 2018 demonstrated the difficulty of holding majorities in both houses. Following the normal pattern, Democrats won more than 30 seats in the House and gained control of the lower house. Republican held onto a slim majority in the Senate. So who's in the House? Who's in the House? We know the Republicans maintaining control of the Senate. Democrats won more than 30 seats in the House and gained control of the lower house. So we have the Republicans that's in the Senate, and then the Democrats are in the lower house, so the House of Representatives. All right, so now we're going to the congressional apportionment. So congressional is relating to Congress, and then apportionment means what? So I had to look this word up. I actually glanced at this, and now I kind of don't remember. So apportionment, I know that's a portion, you think you do groups, apportionment, APPORITIONMENT. I have the action or result of apportioning something. Okay. All right. So congressional, relating Congress, apportionment, making portions, relating to Congress, portions. All right, let's read. So describe the process of reapportionment and redistricting. So two of the most complicated aspects of congressional election are apportionment issues, reapportionment and redistricting. In the landmark 6-2 vote in 1962, the U.S. Supreme Court made the apportionment of state legislative districts a justiciable question, reviewable. The court did so by invoking the 14th Amendment principle that no state can deny to any person the equal protection of the law. In 1964, the court held that both chambers of a state legislature must be apportioned so that all the districts are equal in population. Later that year, the court applied this one person, one vote principle to the U.S. congressional district on the basis of Article 1, Section 2 of the Constitution, which requires that members of the House be chosen by the people of the several states. So the Constitution, the U.S. congressional districts, the Constitution, which requires that members of the House be chosen by the people of several states. So members of the House is chosen by the people. Y'all following along? So severe malapportionment of congressional districts before 1964 resulted in some districts containing 2 or 3 times the population of other districts in the same state, thereby diluting the effect of the vote cast in more populous districts. The system generally benefited the conservative population of rural areas and small towns and harmed the interests of more heavily populated and liberal cities. Suburban areas have benefited the most from the court's rulings, as suburbs account for an increasingly larger proportion of the nation's population, whereas cities include a correspondingly smaller segment of the population. Conservative, liberal. What's the difference? I have conservative holding the traditional attitudes and values and causes about change or innovation, typically in relation to politics or religion. So traditional, conservative, think traditional. And then liberals, what? Open to new behavior or opinions and willing to discard, get rid of the traditional values. So they're all about the new behavioral. That's the liberals. And so it says here, I'm going to reread some of this information. It says in some districts containing 2 or 3 times the population of other districts in the same state, thereby diluting the effect of the vote cast in more populous districts. The system generally benefited the conservative populations of rural areas, so that's traditional, and small towns, and harmed the interests of the more heavily populated liberal cities. So those people are all about the new. Gerrymandering. So although the general issue of apportionment has been dealt very fairly, successfully by the one person, one vote principle, the gerrymandering issue has not yet been resolved. Gerrymandering is the drawing of legislative district boundary lines to obtain partisan or factional advantage. A district is said to be gerrymandered when its shape is manipulated by a dominant party in the state legislature to maximize electoral strength at the expense of the minority party. So this term refers to the legislative boundary drawing tactics that were under Elbridge Gerry, the governor of Massachusetts. In the 1812 election, see image 11 through 3, a district is said to have been gerrymandered when its shape is altered substantially by the dominant party in a state legislature to maximize its electoral strength at the expense of the minority party. In 1986, the Supreme Court heard Davis versus Vandermeer, a case that challenged gerrymandered congressional district in Indiana. The court ruled for the first time that redistricting for the political benefit of one group could be challenged on constitutional grounds. In this specific case, however, the court did not agree that the districts were drawn unfairly because it could not be proved that a group of voters would consistently be deprived of influence at the polls as a result of the new districts. What does that mean? So they're talking about redistricting in order to gain a larger number of electoral votes. It says one group could be challenged on constitutional grounds in specific case. However, the court did not agree that districts were drawn unfairly. So they didn't believe the district was drawn unfairly because it could not be proved that a group of voters would consistently be deprived of influence at the polls. That's interesting. So moving on, redistricting after the 2010 census. Republicans won a majority of the seats in the House in 2010 and captured a majority of state houses and governorship. They would have the upper hand in the drawing of new congressional districts after the release of the results of the 2010 census. Consider Ohio. It lost enough population between 2000 and 2010 to lose 2 congressional seats. That meant all the districts in the state would be redrawn to adjust for the lower number of congressional districts. Through the bipartisan redistricting process, Ohio Republicans managed to put 2 seating Democrat members of the Congress, Marcy Kaptur and Dennis Kucinich, in one district, and through the drawing of the district boundaries, enable Republicans to win 12 of the 16 districts. For an example of a Republican-leaning district, look at Figure 11.1, showing Ohio's first congressional district. Although this district includes half of Hamilton County and half of the city of Cincinnati for many years, it now looks like cross signal flags. The district joins the traditional Western Hamilton County district with Warren County to the nearest with an odd-shaped bridge. The intent is to add enough Republican voters to the district to offset the majority Democratic vote in Cincinnati. Redistricting decisions are often made by a small group of political leaders within the state legislature. Their goal is to shape voting districts to maximize their party's chances of winning the state legislative seat, as well as seats in Congress. 2 of the techniques used are packing and cracking. They pack voters supporting the opposite party into few districts as possible, or crack the opposing party supporters into different districts. Clearly, partisan redistricting aids incumbents. The party that dominates a state legislature will be making redistricting decisions. Through gerrymandering tactics, districts can be redrawn in such a way as to ensure that parties continue strength in the state legislature or Congress. As noted earlier, some have estimated that only between 30 and 50 of the 435 seats in the House were open for any real competition in the most recent elections. In 2004, the U.S. Supreme Court reviewed an obviously political redistricting scheme in Pennsylvania. The court concluded, however, that the federal judiciary would not address purely political gerrymandering claims. 2 years later, the Supreme Court reached a similar conclusion with respect to most of the new congressional districts created by the Republicans in the Texas legislature in 2003. Again, the court largely refused to intervene in what was plainly a political gerrymandering plan, although they did alter one district. What is that? Does anyone know what that word means? I know non means not. Partisan. So I have not biased or partisan, especially toward any particular political group. Not biased or partisan, especially towards any political group. And then partisan, a strong supporter of a party, a cause, or a person. So not a strong supporter of redistricting. So that's what we're going to be talking about, non-partisan redistricting. Not a supporter of redistricting. Several states, including Arizona, Iowa, and Minnesota, have adopted non-partisan redistricting procedures. As you will see, if you compare the 1st District of Ohio with the map of the Iowa districts, figure 11.2, non-partisan districts usually respect country lines and divide the state into fairly cleanly shaped districts that share geographic characteristics. Research has shown that non-partisan districts tend to be more competitive, no doubt because they have not been drawn to favor one party over the other. Minority majority district. In the early 1990s, the federal government encouraged a type of gerrymandering that facilitated the election of a minority representative from a minority majority area. Under the Voting Rights Act of 1965, the Justice Department issues directives to state after the 1990 census, introducing them to create congressional districts that would maximize the voting power of the minority groups, create districts in which minority voters were the majority. The results were several creatively drawn congressional districts. See, for example, the depiction of the Illinois 4th Congressional District in Figure 11.3, which is commonly described as a pair of earmuffs. So, all right, do y'all get that? All right, minority, majority. So minority, the smaller group. And then majority. So I'm going to go back and I'm going to reread this one because I didn't really understand that. So I understand what minority is a smaller group, and then the majority is like a larger population. And then I understand districts, how we have different districts within a state. There's different districts. So I get that part. So I'm going to reread this. It's talking about in 1990s. So I understand that part. We're in that era, 1990s. I was actually born in 91, so that's not that long ago. It's actually 20 years ago to be exact, 1990. So in the early 1990s, the federal government encouraged a type of gerrymandering that facilitated the election of the minority representatives from a minority majority area. Under the Voting Rights Act of 1965, the Justice Department issued directives to state after the 1990 census, instructing them to create congressional districts that would maximize the voting power of minority groups, create districts in which minority voters were the majority. The results were several creatively drawn congressional districts. See, for example, the depiction of the Illinois 4th Congressional District in Figure 11.3, which is commonly described as a pair of earmuffs. All right, so constitutional challenges. Many of these minority majority districts were challenged in court by citizens who claim that creating districts based on race or ethnic alone violates the Equal Protection Clause of the Constitution. In 1995, the Supreme Court agreed with this argument when it declared that Georgia's new 11th congressional district was unconstitutional. The district stretched from Atlanta to the Atlantic, splitting 8 countries or counties and 5 municipalities along the way. The court ruled that when a state assigns voters on the basis of race, it engages in an offensive and demeaning assumption that voters of a particular race, because of their race, think alike, share the same political interests, and will prefer the same candidates at the polls. The court also chastised the Justice Department for concluding that race-based districting was mandated under the Voting Rights Act of 1965. When the Justice Department interpretation of the act compels race-based districting, it by definition raises a serious constitutional question. In subsequent rulings, the court affirmed its position. What's municipalities? Do y'all know what that is? Municipalities. So I have a city or town that has corporate status and local government. Changing directions. In the early 2000s, the Supreme Court took a new direction on racial redistricting challenges. So they're going to go a new direction on racial redistricting challenges. So in a 2000 case, the court limited the federal government's authority to invalidate changes in state and local elections on the basis that the changes were discriminatory. The case involved a proposed school redistricting plan in Louisiana. The court held that federal approval for the plan could not be withheld simply because the plan was discriminatory. Rather, the test was whether the plan left racial or ethnic minorities worse off than they were before. In 2001, the Supreme Court reviewed for a second time a case involving North Carolina's 12th district. The district of 165 miles long and largely hewn to Interstate 85. It was drawn to connect most of the urban centers where African American voters lived. In 1996, the court had held that the district was unconstitutional because race had been the dominant factor in drawing its boundaries. Shortly thereafter, the boundaries were redrawn, but the district was again challenged as a racial gerrymander. In 2001, however, the Supreme Court held that there was an insufficient evidence for the lower court's conclusion that race had been the dominant factor when the boundaries were redrawn. The 12th district's boundary remained as drawn. Perks and privileges. Legislators have many benefits that are not available to most workers. So legislators are what? I know them as like lawmakers. What's a legislator? A person who makes laws, a member of a legislative body. So legislators, the ones that make laws, have many benefits that are not available to most workers. They are granted generous franking privileges, permitting them to mail newsletters, surveys, and other correspondence to their constituents. What's a constituent? I know that was in the last reading. Constituent. A member of a constituency. What's that? What's a constituency? A body of voters in a specified area who elect a representative to a legislative body. So an area whose voters elect a representative to a legislative body. Are you a voter? So it's a body of voters in a specific area who elect a representative to a legislative body. That's constituency. So legislators, they make the laws, but guess what? The people vote for that person to get into that position. Are you a part of a constituency group? The annual cost of congressional mail rose from 11 million in 1971 to a peak of 70 million. Congress has largely graduated to email and social networks to distribute literature. Today, the franking budget is less than 10 million. That's a lot of money for mail, $11 million. And that was in 1971. And now it rose to a peak of 70 million. And then it says today the franking budget is less than 10 million. So I'm going to go back and read. It says Congress has largely graduated to email and social networks to distribute literature. And then it says today's budget is less than 10 million. So that makes sense. So now we have people who are using the social network and they're using emails to get their information across and to advertise. And so the budget has gone down. 10 million. It's gone down. That's really good. Permanent professional staffs. More than 30,000 people are employed in the Capitol Hill bureaucracy. What's bureaucracy? Y'all know what that is? I looked this up earlier. It is a system of government in which most of the important decisions are made by state officials rather than by elected representatives. Bureaucracy. So it's a system of government in which most of the important decisions are made by state officials rather than by elected representatives. I like that. So more than 30,000 people are employed in the Capitol Hill bureaucracy. That's a lot of people. About half of them are personal and committee staff members. That's 15,000. Personal staff include office clerks and secretaries, professionals who deal with media relations, draft legislation, and satisfy constituency requests for service, and staffers who maintain local offices in the member's home district or state. The average Senate office on Capitol Hill employs about 30 staff members, and twice that number work on the personal staffs of senators from the most populous state. House office staffs are limited to 18 employees. The number of staff members have increased dramatically since 1960. Most increases come in assistance to individual members. Some questions whether staff members are really advising on legislation or are primarily aiding constituents and gaining votes in the next election. Congress also benefits from the expertise of the professional staffs of agencies created to produce information for members. The Congressional Research Service, the Government Accountability Office, and the Congressional Budget Office all provide reports, audits, and policy recommendation for review by members of Congress. Privileges and immunities under the law. Members of Congress also benefit from some special constitutional protections. Under Article 1, Section 6 of the Constitution, they shall, in all cases except treason, felony, and breach of the peace, be privileged from arrest during their attendance at the session of their respective houses, and in going to and returning from the same, and for any speech or debate in either house, they shall not be questioned in any other place. The arrest immunity clause is not really an important provision today. The speech or debate clause, however, means that a member may make any allegations or other statements he or she wishes in connection with official duties and normally not be sued for libel or slander or otherwise be subject to legal action. I don't really know what I just read. So I know we talked a little bit about the Article 1, Section 6. And it talked a little bit about a felony and arrest. It says the arrest immunity clause is not really an important provision today. The speech or debate clause, however, means that a member may make any allegation or other statements he or she wishes in connection with official duties or normally not be sued. So not be sued for libel or slander or otherwise be subject to legal action. So that's privileges and immunities under law. I'm going to look up the word immunity. Y'all know what that word means? The ability of an organism to resist a particular infection or toxin by the action of specific antibodies or sensitized white blood cells. I think I said that wrong. I don't think it's orgasm. I think it's organism. The ability of an organism to resist a particular infection or toxin by the action of specific antibodies or sensitized white blood cells. I have another example relating the law. That one was relating the, looks like maybe biology. So this one's relating to the law. It says officially granted exemptions from legal proceedings. Does that make sense? Exemptions. Exemptions is the process of freeing or state of being free from an obligation or liability imposed on others. So officially granted exemption, officially granted being free from legal proceedings. All right. You guys like freedom of speech, the First Amendment? Libel, a published false statement that is damaging to a person's reputation and written defamation. So not sued for libel or slander or otherwise be subject to legal action. So a member may make any allegations or other statements he or she wishes in connection with official duties and normally not be sued for libel or slander or otherwise be subject to legal action. What do you think about that? Now I understand. So this is basically saying that, do you understand? Maybe you already understand. I'm just getting it. So Congress, we're talking about Congress, right? Members of Congress also benefit from the constitutional protection. So they benefit from this constitutional protection. Privilege from arrest during the attendance of the same session of their respective houses and in going to and returning from the same, and for any speech or debate in either house. They shall not be questioned in any other place. The arrest immunity clause is not really an important provision today. The speech or debate clause, however, means that a member may make any allegations or other statements he or she wishes in connection with official duties and normally not be sued for libel or slander. So they get to kind of say what they want. And because we know that they're in this position that, you know, we trust their words, and this is the best. These are the people that are at the top. So, you know, let's give them room to be able to say what they need to say, and they're not going to be punished by that because we know that words that come out of their mouth are going to be the right words. And so this is my understanding of it, of what I'm reading, that, you know, they get more privileges, I guess, because of who they are and their position and you know, yeah, it's Congress. All right, so congressional caucuses, another source of support. So congressionals relating to Congress. What's caucus? Y'all know what that means? Caucus? So I have caucus here. It's talking about like a Black Sea. A mountain range located between Caspian Sea. I don't think that's the right caucus. All right, so I'm just going to make sure I spell it right. How are y'all doing? Are y'all enjoying the study time? I didn't spell it the right way. So here it is. It says, in some U.S. states, a meeting at which local members of a political party register their preference among candidates running for office or select delegates to attend convention. So it's a meeting at which local members of a political party register their preference among candidates running for office or select delegates to attend convention. Delegates are representatives. Another definition is a conference of members of a legislative body, those that make the laws, legislative, who belong to a particular party or faction. So it's a conference of members, it's a meeting at which local members of a political party register their preference among candidates running for office and select the delegates to attend the convention. So a caucus. You ever been to a caucus? Do you know anyone that's been to a caucus before? So congressional, relating to Congress, right? Caucus, this meeting, another source of support. How's that? Do you want support from a caucus? All right, so all members of Congress, all of them, all members of Congress are members of one or more caucuses. The most important caucuses are those established by the parties in each chamber. So the most important caucuses are those established by the parties in each chamber. The Democratic and Republicans meetings provide information and devise legislative strategy for a party. So read that again. So these Democratic and Republican meetings provide information and devise legislative strategy for the party. Other caucuses bring together members who have similar political views, such as the Moderate Democratic Study Group, whereas some have a constituency focus, such as the Rust Belt Caucus or the Potato Caucus. Some of the most important and influential caucuses are those for minority and underrepresented groups in Congress. The Congressional Women's Caucus has long provided support for the women elected to the Congress and have provided a forum for discussing issues that women members find important, including the treatment of women in Afghanistan. Two of the most important minority-based caucuses are the Congressional Black Caucus and the Hispanic Congressional Caucus. Both have grown in the last 2 decades as the numbers of African American and Hispanic members grew. They are now an information for members of Congress to help build support among specific groups of voters. So they are now funded by businesses and special interests and provide staff assistance and information for members of Congress to help build support among specific groups of voters. The committee structure. Does the importance of committees to the lawmaking process and to the ability of members of Congress do their jobs? So discuss the importance of committees to lawmaking process and to the ability of members of Congress to do their jobs. So thousands of bills are introduced in every session of Congress, and no single member can possibly be adequately informed on all the issues that arise. The committee system is a way to provide for a specialization or a division of the legislative labor. Members of a committee can concentrate on just one area or topic and develop sufficient expertise to draft appropriate legislation when needed. The flow of legislation through both the House and the Senate is determined largely by the speed with which the members of these committees act on bills and resolutions. The power of committees, sometimes called little legislators. Committees usually have the final say on piece of legislation. Committee actions may be overturned on the floor by the House or Senate, but this rarely happens. Legislators normally defer to the expertise of the chairperson and other members of the committee who speak on the floor in defense of a committee decision. Chairperson of committees exercise control over the scheduling of hearings and formal actions on a bill and decide which subcommittee will act on legislation failing within their committee's jurisdiction. Committees only rarely are deprived of control over a bill, although this kind of action is provided for in rules of each chamber. In the House, if a bill has been considered by a standing committee for 30 days, the signature of the majority 218 of the House members on a discharge petition can pry a bill out of an cooperative committee's hands. From 1909 to the present, although more than 900 such petitions were initiated, only slightly more than 24 resulted in successful discharge efforts. Of those, 20 results in bills that passed the House. Types of congressional committees. Over the past 2 centuries, Congress has created several different types of committees, each of which serves the particular needs of the institution. Standing committees. By far, the most important committees in Congress are the standing committees, permanent bodies that continue from session to session. A list of standing committees of the 115th Congress is presented in Table 11.5. In addition, most of the standing committees have created subcommittees to carry out their work. The 115th Congress had 70 subcommittees in the Senate and 104 subcommittees in the House. Each standing committee is given a specific area of legislative policy jurisdiction, and almost all legislative measures are considered by the appropriate standing committees. So what is a committee? We talked a whole lot about committees. I probably could have did like an introduction because it's like, what is that? So what is a committee? Y'all know what committee is? I think of group. It says a group of people appointed for a specific function, typically consisting of members of a larger group. So people that are appointed for a specific function. Are you a part of a committee? Have you ever been a part of a committee? Do you know anyone who's a part of a committee? So standing committees of the 115th Congress from 2017 to 2019, House committee and Senate committees. The House committees are as follows: Agriculture, Appropriations, Armed Services, Budget, Education and the Workforce, Energy and Commerce, Ethics, Financial Services, Foreign Affairs, Homeland Security, House Administration, Intelligence, Judiciary, Natural Resources, Oversight of and Government Reform, Rules, Science, Space and Technology, Small Business, Transportation and Infrastructure, Veterans Affairs, Ways of Means. And Senate committees are as follows: Agriculture, Nutrition and Forestry, Appropriations, Armed Services, Banking, Housing and Urban Affairs, Budget, Commerce, Science and Transportation, Energy and Natural Resources, Environment and Public Works, Finance, Foreign Relations, Health, Education, Labor and Pensions, Homeland Security and Governmental Affairs, Judiciary, Rules and Administration, Small Business and Entrepreneurship, Veteran Affairs. Because of the importance of their work and the traditional influence of their members in Congress, certain committees are considered to be more prestigious than others. Seats on standing committees that handle spending issues are especially desirable because members can use these positions to benefit their constituents. Committees that control spending include the Appropriations Committee in either chamber and the Ways and Means Committee in the House. Members also seek seats on committees that handle matters of special interest to their constituents. A member of the House from an agriculture district, for example, will have an interest in joining the House Agriculture Committee. Select committees. In principle, a select committee is created for a limited time and for a specific legislative purpose. For example, a select committee may be formed to investigate a public problem, such as child nutrition or aging. In practice, a select committee, such as a select committee or on intelligence, in each chamber may continue indefinitely. Select committees rarely create original legislation. Joint committee. A joint committee is formed by a concurrent action of both members of Congress and consists a member from each chamber. Joint committees may be permanent or temporary, have dealt with the economy, taxation, and the Library of Congress. So a select committee and a joint committee. So what's the difference? Y'all know? All right. So a select committee, I'll go back and read the definition, is a legislative committee composed of members of both chambers of Congress. A legislative committee composed or made up of members of both chambers of Congress. Both chambers of Congress is what? The Senate and the House of Representatives. A joint committee. A select committee is a temporary legislative committee established for a limited time period or for a special purpose. Let's look at a conference committee. Special joint committees. Conference committees are formed to achieve agreement between the House and the Senate on the exact wording of legislative acts when the two chambers pass legislative proposal in different forms. The bill is reported out of the conference committee if it is approved by the majority of members from both houses who sit on the committee and is returned to the House and Senate for final votes. No bill can be sent to the White House to be signed into law unless it first passes both chambers in identical form, sometimes called Third House of Congress. Conference committees are in position to make significant alterations to legislation and frequently become the focal point of policy debates. So what is conference committees? A special joint committee appointed to reconcile the difference when bills pass the two chambers of Congress in different forms. The two chambers in Congress, the Senate and the House of Representatives. The House Rules Committee, because of its special gatekeeping power over the terms on which legislation will reach the floor of the House of Representatives, the House Rules Committee holds an unequally powerful position. A special commitment rule the time limit on debate and determines whether and how a bill may be amended. This practice dates back to 1883. The Rules Committee has the unusual power to meet while the House is in session, to have its resolutions considered immediately on the floor, and to initiate legislation on its own. Moving on, the selection of committee members in both chambers, the Senate, the House of Representatives, both chambers, members are appointed to standing committees by the steering committee of their party. Republicans are in the Senate. The Democrats are in the House of Representatives. The majority party member with the longest term of continuous service on a standing committee can be given preference when the leadership nominates chairperson. So the majority party member with the longest term of continuous service on a standing committee can be given preference when the leadership nominates chairperson. During his time as Speaker of the House, Newt Gingrich restricted chairperson's terms to 6 years. Additionally, he bypassed seniority to appoint chairpersons loyal to his own platform. Respecting seniority is an informal traditional process, and it applies to other significant posts in Congress as well. The seniority system, although it deliberately treats members unequally, provides a predictable means of assigning positions of power within Congress. The most senior member of the minority party is called the ranking committee, members for that party. The general pattern was that members of the House or Senate who represented safe seats would be re-elected continually and eventually would accumulate enough years of continuous committee service to enable them to become the chairpersons of their committee. In the 1970s, a number of reform in the use of a secret ballot in electing House committee chairpersons and allowed for the possibility of choosing a chairperson on the basis of other than seniority. On a base other than seniority. So the Democrats immediately replaced 3 senior chairpersons who were out of step with the rest of their party. The Republican leadership in the House has also taken more control over the selection of committee chairpersons. So it sounds like there are some Republicans that are in the House also. I said that who's in the Senate, Republicans, and who's in the House, Democrats. And then right here it says the Republican leadership in the House has also taken control over a selection of committee chairpersons. So there's also some Republicans in the House. All right. So I'm going to keep reading, checking out the pages here. 10 more pages left. All right. So the formal leadership. Describe the leadership structure in each of Congress. Describe the leadership structure in each House of Congress, noting the differences between the House and the Senate. The limited amount of centralized power that exists in Congress is exercised through party-based mechanism. Congress is organized by party. When the Democratic Party wins a majority of seats in either House or the Senate, the Democrat controls the official position of power in that chamber, and every important committee has a Democratic chairperson and a majority of Democratic members. The same process holds when Republicans are in majority. For a complete list of the current leadership of both parties in the House of Representatives, go to www.house.gov. Generally speaking, the leadership organization in the House and the Senate look alike on paper. Leaders of the House of Representatives, however, have more control over the agenda of the body and often over their own party's members. Senate leaders do not have the power of individual members. Most work closely with their party's leaders to achieve success. Although party leaders in both the House and the Senate are considered to be the most powerful members of the Congress, their powers pale compared to those given to the leaders in true party's government, legislators. The difference between the legislators and the U.S. Congress are detailed in the Beyond Our Borders feature. Leadership in the House. The House leadership is made up of the Speaker, the majority and minority leaders, and the party whips. The Speaker, the foremost power holder in the House of Representatives, is the Speaker of the House. The Speaker's position is a non-partisan one, but for the better part of 2 centuries has been the official leader of the majority party in the House. When a new Congress convenes, each party nominates a candidate for Speaker. All Democratic members of the House are expected to vote for their party's nominee, and all Republicans are expected to support their candidate. The vote to organize the House is one vote in which representatives must vote with their party. In a sense, this vote defines a member's partisan status. The influence of modern-day speakers is based primarily on their personal prestige, persuasive ability, and knowledge of the legislative process, plus an acquiescence or active support of other representatives. In recent years, both the Republican and Democratic parties in the House have been given their leaders more power in making appointments and controlling the agenda. The major formal powers of the Speaker include the following. So, number 1, presiding over meetings of the House. Number 2, appointing members of joint committees and conference committees. Number 3, scheduling legislation for the floor action. Number 4, deciding points of order and interpreting the rules with the advice of the House parliamentarian. parliamentarian. And number 5, referring bills and resolutions to the appropriate standing committees of the House. A speaker may take part in floor debate and vote, as can any other member of Congress. But recent speakers usually have voted only to break a tie. Since 1975, the speaker, when a Democrat, has also had the power to appoint the Democrat steering committee, which determines new committee assignments for House party members. The powers of the speaker are related to his or her control over information and communications channels in the House and the degree of support received from members. This is a significant power in a large, decentralized institution in which information is a very important resource. Since the speakership of Newt Gingrich, RGA, in 1994, the leadership of the House has held significant power to control the agenda and provide rewards to the members. During the same time period, the degree of polarization between the majority and the minority parties has increased, and the cohesion within each party has grown stronger. Scholars suggest that this is the result of increased ideological makeup within the congressional delegation of both parties and the election of fewer moderates or centrist members to the House. So the next one is the majority leader. And then we're going to read the minority leaders. So who's the majority leader? The majority leader of the House is elected by a caucus. And it says a majority leader of the House is a legislative position held by an important party member in the House of Representatives. The majority leader is selected by the majority party in a caucus or conference to foster cohesion among party members and to act as a spokesperson for the majority party in the House. We know that the caucus is a meeting. It's a group. The majority leader of the House is elected by a caucus of the majority party to foster cohesion among the members and to act as a spokesperson for the party. The majority leader cooperates with the speaker and other party leaders to formulate the party's legislative program and to guide it through the legislative process in the House. The Democrats often recruit future speakers from those who hold that position. The minority leader of the House is a candidate nominated for speaker by a caucus of the majority party. Like the majority leader, the leader of the minority party has as her or his primary responsibility the maintaining of cohesion within the party's ranks. The minority leader works for cohesion among the party's members and speaks on behalf of the president if the minority party controls the White House. In relation with the majority party, the minority leaders consult with both the speaker and the majority leader on recognizing members who wish to speak on the floor, on House rules and procedures, and the scheduling of legislation. Minority leaders have no actual power in these areas, however. Y'all get that? I feel like I'm saying a whole lot right here. I hope you guys are enjoying the study time. So there's different roles with the majority leader of the House and the minority leader of the House. So we know, I'm going to kind of revise it. The majority leader of the House is elected by a caucus. So a caucus is a group of people who are a part of the same group. They elect the majority leader of the House. So the majority party to foster cohesion among the party members and to act as a spokesperson of the party. So the minority is the candidates nominated for the speaker by the caucus of the minority party. So, like the majority, the leader of the minority party also has his primary responsibility of maintaining cohesion within the party's rank. So, whips, WHIPS, whips. The leadership of each party includes assistants to the majority and minority leaders. Whips are members of Congress who assist the party leaders by passing information down from the leadership to the party members and by ensuring that members show up for floor debate and cast their votes on important issues. Whips conduct polls among party members about members' views on legislation, information the leaders about whose vote is doubtful and whose is certain, and exert pressure on members to support the leader's position. In the House, serving as a whip is the first step towards position of higher leadership. Leadership in the Senate. The Senate is less than 1/4 the size of the House. In fact, alone explains why a formal, complex, and centralized leadership structure is not as necessary in the Senate as it is in the House. For a list of current leaders of both parties in the U.S. Senate, go to www.senate.gov. The two highest ranking formal leadership positions in the Senate are essentially ceremonial in nature. Under the Constitution, the Vice President of the United States is the President of the Senate and may vote to break a tie. The Vice President, however, is not rarely present for a meeting of the Senate. Instead, the Senate elects a President pro tempore to preside over the Senate in the Vice President's absence. Ordinarily, the President pro tem is a member of the majority party with the longest continuous term and service in the Senate. The President pro tem is mostly ceremonial position. Junior senators take turns actually presiding over the sessions of the Senate. The real leadership power in the Senate rests in the hands of the Senate Majority Leader and Senate Minority Leader and other respective whips. The Senate Majority and Minority Leaders have the right to be recognized first in debate on the floor and generally exercise the same powers available to the House Majority and Minority Leaders. They control the Policy Committee, influence and allocation of committee assignments for new members or for senators attempting to transfer to new committees, influence the selection of other party officials, and participate in selecting members of conference committees. They are expected to mobilize support for partisan legislative initiatives or for the proposal of a president who belongs to their party. The leaders act as liaisons with the White House when the president is of their party, try to obtain a cooperation of committee chairpersons, and seek to facilitate a smooth functioning of the Senate through the senators' unanimous consent. The majority and minority leaders are elected by their respective party caucus. Senate party whips, like their House county parts, maintain communication within the party on platform positions and try to ensure that party colleagues are represent the floor debate of important votes. The Senate whips are or is far less elaborate than the counterpart in the House, simply because there are fewer members to track. So, how members of Congress decide? Describe how a bill becomes a law and explain how the different processes in the House and the Senate influence legislating. Each member of Congress casts hundreds of votes in each session and compiles a record of votes during the years that he or she spends in a national legislature. Research shows that the best predictor of the members' vote is party affiliation. Party leadership in each house works hard to build cohesion and agreement among the members through the activities of the party caucuses and conferences. The conservative coalition. Political parties are not always unified. In the 1950s and 1960s, the Democrats in Congress were often split between Northern liberals and Southern conservatives, which gave rise to the conservative coalition, a voting bloc made up of conservative Democrats and conservative Republicans. The coalition was able to win many votes over the years. Today, however, most Southern conservatives and Republicans, so the coalition has almost disappeared. Some Democrats in Congress, however, represents more moderate states or districts. The votes of these members, who are known as Blue Dog Democrats, are frequently courted by Republican leaders. Polarization and gridlock. Over the last 2 decades, both parties have become more cohesive, both within the halls of Congress and at the state and local level. Almost all of the Democratic members of Congress would now consider themselves to be liberals, whereas almost all the Republican members of Congress could be considered conservative. Numerous voting studies have concluded that both houses of Congress are more polarized than at any time in the last 50 years. This is due in part to the ability of the parties to draw congressional districts that are most heavily Democratic or Republican. To win the nominations in such a district, the candidate must gain the votes of the most liberal or most conservative voters. The majority of Democratic representatives are very likely to vote against the majority of Republicans. Add to this increasing polarization the strong division between groups of people over beliefs. This situation is often termed divided government. Divided government can be effective if the parties agree to compromise. When there is a foreign policy crisis, for example, parties typically work well together. Divided governments can also lead to a situation where neither side is willing to compromise on public policy, resulting in what is popularly known as gridlock. When this happens, major legislation stalls, and the only laws that are passed are those which are non controversial. Polling over the years shows that the American public is strongly in favor of a productive Congress, regardless of which party is in the majority in either house. Crossing over. On some votes, individual representatives and senators vote against their party, crossing over to the other side because the interests of these states or districts differ from the interests that prevail within the rest of their party. Democratic senators from Western states normally vote with Republican on agriculture bills. Other voting decisions are based on the members' religious and ideological beliefs. Votes on issues such as abortion and gay rights may be motivated by a member's ideology on personal beliefs. With so many voting decisions, every member cannot be fully informed on each issue. Research suggests that many voting decisions are based on clues provided by trusted colleagues or the party's leadership. A member who sits on the committee that wrote a law may become a liable source of information about that law. Alternatively, a member may turn to a colleague who represents a district in some state or one who represents a similar district for clues on voting. Clues may also come from fellow committee members leading and the administration. Log rolling, earmarks, and pork. Sometimes leaders on either side of the aisle will offer incentives to get needed votes for the passage of legislation. Even the president has been known to offer opportunities for the member to better serve his or her district by bringing home the bacon. When a member trades his or her votes on a particular bill with another member in exchange for his or her vote on other legislation, the practice is known as log rolling. Often members request that special appropriations for projects back home are attached to a bill to gain their votes. If the actual project is named, this is referred to as an end mark. The term comes from a V-shaped mark that is cut in a pig's ear to identify the animal. These special projects are often referred to as pork, as in bringing home the bacon. Although the Congress passed a moratorium on earmarks in 2011, special projects still find their way into the budget. A close reading of the 2005 appropriation bill found 4.2 billion in earmarks. Efforts have been made to force lawmakers to reveal all of their special projects, but new methods have emerged to hide these special appropriations from the public's eyes. Politicians and reforms often rail against the practice of earmarks, and some projects seem ridiculous to everyone except those who will benefit. In some cases, earmarks truly are needed. In others, they are seen as the key to keeping a member of Congress in office. As the late Senator Robert Byrd of West Virginia was known to remark, one of the pork is another man's job. One man's pork is another man's job. How a bill becomes law. Each year, Congress and the President propose and approve many laws. As detailed in Figure 11.4, each law begins as a bill, which must be introduced in either the House or the Senate. Often similar bills are introduced in both chambers. A money bill, however, must start in the House. In each chamber, the bill follows similar steps. It is referred to a committee and its subcommittee for study, discussion, hearing, and rewriting, markup. When the bill is reported out to the full chamber, it must be scheduled for debate by the Rules Committee in the House and by the leadership in the Senate. After the bill has been passed in each chamber, if it contains different provisions, a conference committee is formed to write a compromise bill, which must be approved by both chambers before it is sent to the president to sign or veto. Another form of congressional action, the joint resolution, differs little from a bill in how it is proposed or debated. Often it is approved by both chambers and signed by the president. It has the force of law. A joint resolution to amend the Constitution, however, after it is approved by two-thirds of both chambers is sent not to the president, but to the states for ratification. How much will the government spend? Explain how the federal budget is constructed and the legislative process for approving the budget. The Constitution is very clear about where the power of the purse lies in the national government. All taxing and spending bills must originate in the House of Representatives. Today, much of the business of Congress is concerned with approving government expenditures through the budget process and raising the revenues to pay for the government program. From 1922, when Congress required the president to prepare a present to the legislature and executive budget, until 1974, the congressional budget process was so disjointed that it was difficult to visualize the total picture of the government finances. The president presented the executive budget to Congress in January. It was broken down into 13 or more appropriation bills. After all the bills had been debated, amended, and passed, it was more or less possible to estimate total government spending for the next year. Frustrated by the president's ability to impound, withhold funds, and dissatisfied with the entire budget process, Congress passed the Budget and Impoundment Control Act of 1974 to regain some control over the nation's spending. The act required the president to spend the funds that Congress had appropriated, ending the president's ability to kill programs by withholding funds. The other major accomplishment was to force Congress to examine total national taxing and spending at least twice in each budget cycle. See Figure 11.5 for a geographic illustration of the budget cycle. So I see the budget cycle in 11.5, the executive budget process, legislative budgeting process, and execution. For the executive budgeting process, we have executive agency request about 1 to 1.5 years before the start of the fiscal year or in March to September. Then it goes to the Office of Management and Budget, OMB, review and presidential approve 9 months to 1 year before the start of the fiasco year or in September to December. Then I have an arrow that points to another box. It says executive branch submits a budget to Congress 8 to 9 months before the start of the fiasco year at the end of January. Okay, we're in the legislative budgeting process. Then it goes to the first budget resolution by May 15th, and then it goes to the second budget resolution by October 1st. And then we go down to the execution, the start of fiasco year, October 1st, outlays the obligations, October 1st to September 30th. And then it goes to the audit of the fiasco year, outlays a selective bias basis by the Government Accountability Office, GAO. So it's a budget cycle. So it starts with the executive budgeting process, and then it goes to the legislative budgeting process, and then it goes to execution. Do you guys like systems? All right, let's keep going here. So preparing the budget. The federal government operates on a fiasco year, FY, cycle. The fiasco year runs from October through September. So that fiasco year, 2008, or FY18, runs from October 1st, 2017 through September 30th, 2018. 18 months before a fiasco year starts. The executive branch begins preparing the budget. The Office of Management and Budget, OMB, outlines the budget and then sends it to various departments and agencies. Bargaining follows, in which, for example, the Department of Health and Human Services argues for more welfare spending and the armed forces argue for more defense spending. You can find the federal budget on the official OMB website. Even though the OMB has only 600 employees, it is one of the most powerful agencies in Washington. It assembles the budget documents and minorities and monitors federal agencies throughout each year. Every year, it begins the budget process with a spring review, in which it requires all of the agencies to review their programs, activities, and goals. Several months later, the OMB begins the fall review. At this time, the OMB looks at budget requests and, in almost all cases, pares them back. Although the OMB works within guidelines established by the president, specific decisions often are left to the OMB director and the director's associates. The budget must be completed by January so that it can be included in the economic report of the president. Congress faces the budget. In January, 9 months before the fiasco year starts, the president takes the OMB's proposed budget, approves it, and submits it to Congress. The congressional budgeting process takes over. The first budget resolution by Congress is scheduled to be passed in May of each year. It sets overall revenue goals and spending targets. During the summer, bargaining among all the concerned parties takes place. Spending and tax laws that are drawn up during this period are supposed to be guided by the May congressional budget resolutions. For each department budget, Congress must authorize funds to be spent. The authorization is a formal declaration by the appropriate congressional committee that a certain amount of funding may be available to an agency. After the funds are authorized, they must be appropriated by Congress. The appropriation committees of both the House and the Senate forward spending bills to their respective bodies. The appropriation of funds occurs when the final bill is passed. Budget resolutions. By September, Congress is scheduled to pass its second budget resolution, one that will set binding limits on taxes and spending for the fiasco year beginning October 1st. Bills passed before that date that do not fit within the limits of the budget resolution are supposed to be changed. In actuality, between 1978 and 1996, Congress did not pass a complete budget by October 1st. Some years, the Congress has not succeeded in passing a budget at all. In other words, generally, Congress does not follow its own rules. In each fiasco year that starts without a budget, every agency operates on the basis of a continuing resolution. Each enables the agency to continue its present function with funding equal to that of the provision year. Even continuing resolutions have not always passed on time. Oh my goodness, that's the end. We got through those 10 pages. I was just going and going. So that's some information about Congress. So here's a recap here. We have the chapter summary. So we went from 1.1 all the way through 1.7. So recap 11.1. It says the first 17 clauses of Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution specify most of the enumerated or express powers of Congress, including the right to impose taxes, to borrow money, to regulate commerce, and to declare war. Congress also enjoys the right to make laws, which shall be necessary for proper for carrying into execution the foregoing powers and all other powers vested by the Constitution in the government of the United States or in any department or officer thereof. This is called the elastic or necessary and proper clause. 11.2. The authors of the Constitution believe that the bulk of national power should reside in the legislature because it represents the voters most directly. All legislative powers resist in Congress. And the Constitution states that Congress will consist of two chambers, a result of the Connecticut Compromise. This bicameral structure established a balanced legislature with the members in the House of Representatives based on population and the members in the Senate based on the equality of states. 11.2. The functions of Congress include number 1, lawmaking, number 2, representation, number 3, service of constituents, number 4, oversight, number 5, public education, and number 6, conflict resolution. Members of the House and the Senate cultivate votes in their constituencies by representing local interests, providing services, and bringing home federal dollars for projects. At the same time, they must participate in debate and lawmaking for the nation as a whole. This may entail casting votes for legislation that may be of no interest to their constituents or may in fact not be beneficial to them. They also participate in committees that allow them to oversee government departments, educate the public, and work to resolve conflicts over policy. 11.2, the House of Representatives has 435 members and the Senate has 100 members. Due to its larger size, the House has more formal rules. The Senate tradition of ultimately debate filibustering dates back to 1790 and has been used over the years to frustrate the passage of bills. Under the Senate Rule 22, cloture can be used to halt debate on a bill. 11.2, members of Congress are older and wealthier than most Americans, disproportionately white male, and more likely to be trained in professional occupations. Members of the Senate are more likely to be lawyers and to be wealthier than House members. Additionally, there is less diversity in the Senate than in the House of Representatives. 11.3, congressional elections are operated by the individual state government, which must abide by rules established by the Constitution and national status. Most candidates for Congress must win nomination through direct primary. The overwhelmingly majority of incumbent representatives and a smaller proportion of senators who run for re-election are successful. A complicated aspect of congressional election is apportionment, the allocation of legislative seats to constituencies. The Supreme Court's one person, one vote has been applied to equalize the population of congressional and state legislative districts. 11.4, Most of the actual work of legislating is performed by committees and subcommittees within Congress. Legislation introduced into the House or Senate is assigned to the appropriate standing committees to or for review. Select committees are created for a limited time for specific purpose. Joint committees are formed by the concurrent action of both chambers and consist of members of each chambers. Conference committees are special joint committees set up to achieve agreement between the House and the Senate on exact wording of legislative acts passed by both chambers in different forms. The seniority rule, which is usually followed, specific that the longest serving member of the majority party will be the chairpersons of a committee. 11.5. The foremost power in the House of Representatives is the Speaker of the House. Other leaders are the House Majority Leader, the House Minority Leader, and the House Majority Leader and Minority Whips. Formally, the Vice President is the presiding officer of the Senate, with the most senior member of the majority party serving as the president pro tempore and presides when the vice president is absent. Actual leadership in the Senate with the majority leader, the minority leader, and their whips. 11.6, a bill becomes a law by progressing through both the chambers of Congress and their appropriate standing and joint committees to the president. Members are usually most influenced in their voting decision by their party affiliation, their constituency interest groups, their own interest groups, and coups given by other legislators. 11.7, the budget process for a fiscal year begins with preparation of an executive budget by the president. This is reviewed by the Office of Management and Budget and then sent to Congress, which is supposed to pass the final budget by the end of September. Since 1978, Congress generally has not followed its own time rules. So that is a recap of this section. I also have some added information here, print resources, media resources, and some online resources. If y'all want to check some other things out here. So for online source, you have www.cbo.gov, and that's for Congressional Budget Office. This www.house.gov for Congress. And then there is www.rollcall.com. You get the newspaper of the Capitol and provides inside view of developments in Washington, D.C. And then you have www.bis.org, and that's Voter Information Services. So provide the interest group scorecards of the members of Congress and allows you to create your own unique scorecard for candidates of interest. So that's some added information there. The next section is going to be the president. So I will do the president chapter probably tomorrow. That'd be the next one. So we're all done with Congress. Woo! We're all done with Congress. And so now we're going to move on to president, and that is going to be tomorrow. So thank you so much for tuning in. I hope y'all learned something. Thank you for spending time with me. Bye.